The watch captain hissed air between his teeth. Halvern, she ignored him. Jace's response was a thread cut down to its thinnest meaning. Copy. Stand by. Syrah watched history pull taut in front of her, as if time itself were a cable anchored, at both ends by hands that had never agreed to anything. The fleet outside adjusted again, closing ranks around its elder beasts. The mines brightened like a ring of hungry eyes. The gate, a braided torus of impossible metal 3 light seconds away, rotated a degree and then a fraction more, settling into a posture that engineers argued about in bars. Because it was beautiful and stupid, and because it worked, on an unused channel, away from rank, Sarah whispered to herself the thing she should not have believed in anymore, that humans, when cornered by structure, made exits with their bare hands. That the word human mattered even when no one capitalized it. That the fleet, that shouldn't exist, had learned something out there, some trick, some kindness toward the laws that could not be bribed. Lights in the hub dimmed again. Power was being borrowed and promised back with interest. The watch captain's hand hovered over a command he did not want to give. The admiral barked orders from 3 jumps away, too late and too certain. The mines armed. The dreadnought shifted, not to avoid them, but to bow. Jace's laugh came back. Softer now, a man listening to the engine he loved most. On your mark, Cyril. She understood then that the mark was not a time, but a belief. She looked through the holotank, through the clever light, and saw the gate as it had been built in a world where humanity still wrote its name on things without asking permission. She felt the old code on her tongue like a prayer. She gave the mark a word without punctuation. Asterisk, the mines did not explode. They flared, they screamed, they flexed their logic trees into paradoxes, but the space between them folded on itself. Like a closing fist, and then opened empty. Sarah blinked, breath trapped in her throat, and saw the dreadnought still there, unchanged, sliding through a corridor that now only existed for it. The fleet moved as one body, holes shimmering against the gate's impossible arc, and for a second the entire rim was silent, except for the sound of systems straining to interpret. What they had just seen, the admiral on the wideband was still speaking, but his words came staggered, wrong-footed, as though language itself had tripped. Formation, Orion Gate. Halt for inspection, and then silence, because every translator and relay refused to parse contradiction. The fleet had invoked the parent-class override, and the gate had answered like a child, recognizing the sound of its first teacher's voice on Milo's ring. The holotank filled with a new image, the gate yawning wider than protocol allowed, its inner surface glowing with skeins of aurora that bent and shimmered like nerves lit by electricity. The fleet did not hesitate. They plunged forward, the dreadnought at their vanguard, cruisers and carriers gliding in a formation too precise to be rehearsed. Sarah felt her palms sweat. She wanted to reach out and touch the hulls as they passed, as if physical proof might pin down this moment before bureaucracy buried it in explanations. The watch captain swore under his breath. They'll make it through without escort. Do you understand what this means? Every admiral, every praetor. He stopped, because what it meant was too large to fit in words. The Empire's control had always rested on one truth. Only its ships could command the gates. That truth was gone. Syrah leaned forward and whispered so quietly she wasn't sure anyone else heard her. They were here before the Empire. The gates were built for them. The dreadnought crossed the threshold, its shadow vanishing into the aurora, and with it went the impossible fleet. Each vessel dissolved into streaks of light as if history itself were being written backward, their scars and alien grafts glowing like confessions. The old voices cut off one by one until only Jace's remained, faint now, distorted by distance. Tell them we didn't come to bow, he said. Tell them we came to remind. The gate closed, its rotation slowing, auroras dimming into the cold geometry the Empire claimed to understand. What remained in the holotank was empty space, a ghost corridor where impossible ships had passed. The hub stayed quiet for a long breath. Then the admiral's voice returned, steel and panic. Milo's ring, you are ordered to scrub all recordings beyond Class Red. No leaks, no speculation. Report all personnel exposed to this event. Compliance is mandatory. The watch captain's gaze lingered on Sierra. His face was tight, unreadable, a man torn between duty and awe. "You heard him," he said flatly. "No one speaks of this outside the chain." But Sierra's mind was not listening. She still heard Jace's laugh buried under static, still saw the impossible carrier with fractal doors that had opened not to space but to possibility itself. She felt the weight of the word he had asked her to deliver, heavy as an unspent weapon. Humans had not vanished into myth. They had gone out, remade themselves in the dark, and come back carrying something the Empire could not calculate. Her lunch pack vibrated in her pocket, forgotten, still promising a meal that would never be eaten. She pressed her hand against it as if to steady herself, and in that small, ordinary act she realized the Empire's grip was already broken. Not in battles, not in decrees, but in belief. The fleet that shouldn't exist did, and existence itself was enough to crush an empire built on lies. The alarms quieted, the holotank emptied, yet Milo's ring felt forever changed, like a song paused on its final note. Sierra stood there, heart steadying, and understood that history had just shifted its axis, and she, a mechanic with vinegar tricks and grease under her nails, had witnessed its turn. She knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Asterisk. They noticed the ships before they believed in them. The long-range scopes on the Rimwatch platforms were tuned to catch dust ripples from courier craft and the pale knife gleam of pirate cutters. What appeared instead were shadows stitched with cold light, a procession of angles that drank the stars around them and then gave them back to clean, as if the universe were a cheap forgery. The watchers passed around the spectral plots and called the senior. The senior looked twice, whispered something that sounded like a prayer and a curse, and flagged the Imperial relay. The fleet traffic AI marked the contacts as impossible and then, a heartbeat later, amended the label to unclassified. It was the sort of bureaucratic compromise that preceded catastrophes. On the outpost called Milo's Ring, a woman named Sarah Halvern stood in the dull glow of a maintenance deck and waited for her lunch to vibrate itself edible. The ring smelled like burned ozone and compressed algae. She'd been here 6 years, long enough that the station's imperfections had become part of her. The false sunrise each cycle always overshot the warm spectrum and spilled into blue. The ceiling fans were never synchronized. The hull sang a whale song of pressure pulses and thermal strain that no one heard until the lights dimmed, and the mind had nothing to do but listen to what kept it alive. The alert tone was soft at first, meant to be ignored. Sarah ignored it. The second tone cut in at a higher register. The one that made infants cry and old technicians look for fire suppression masks. She tapped the nearest panel and read the scrolling labels. Perimeter breach, unknown formation, advisory only. Advisory meant someone else's problem. Unknown formation meant the advisory would become her problem in minutes. She swore under her breath, pocketed the vibrating lunch without opening it, and jogged toward the ladder well. On the command hub, a scatter of junior officers fell silent as the holotank filled with glitter. The formation was crossing the rim, like a parade ignoring a border. Its vector carried it toward the Orion Gate, the Empire's northern throat. The tank labeled each contact with numbers that rose into the hundreds and then steadied. Sarah slipped in behind the watch captain, a tired man with the weathered face of a ground farmer. He didn't notice her until she leaned closer to the tank and said, "Those aren't Empire hulls." "No," he said, and the word meant more than denial. "No, they aren't." She reached through the holla, toggling overlays. The outlines were wrong. For any known navy, all sharp-limbed geometries with no concession to heritage lines or intimidation profiles. The drives were wrong to absence where signature should be, a gravity well softened by something that tasted like silence. And there were the markings. There were no markings. No banners, no heraldry. No registry codes whispering law to law. She felt herself grin despite the tension, the mechanic in her admiring any engine that ran clean and different. Then the channels bloomed with signal. The voice that came through first was not a voice. It was a lattice of frequencies layered. Into a shape like spoken language, the translation suite took 3 seconds to admit failure. In that interval, the Rimwatch AI stamped the formation as hostile by default. Milo's Ring raised its fields. Patrol crafts spun off their cradles like hornets, untangling their wings. And then the second voice arrived dulled, small, human. It was a narrow-band whistle on a carrier no one had used in a century, a backwater ham radio set wandering into a cathedral. The translator coughed and provided text. Sira watched words float above the holotank in flat white type, identify as human, repeat, human. Advise Imperial Control to hold fire. We are returning. The watch captain's jaw worked. He had the look of a man confronted with a ghost that was making mundane requests. Who is that? Trace shows initial hop from the formation, someone said. But origin modulated through, I don't know. It looks like a Museum Series transmitter, a Tesla Sparrow replica. That can't be right. Sira said nothing. She was staring at the word human, at the lowercase defiance of it. When humanity had first staggered into the long dark dade, branded themselves capital H human where anyone could see it, as if typography could warn off a cold universe. The Empire had replaced that plain claim with an edifice of overlapped identities, house, fleet, office of the kinetics, commerce, intelligences, tributary worlds. Human had become the filler word used by bureaucrats when they forgot which. Banner, a person lived beneath. The watch captain gestured to open a two-way. His voice went formal, Empire neutral. Unidentified formation approaching Orion Gate. You are within Imperial protection. State your registry and intent. The old voice hesitated, as if choosing how much to concede. We are the fleet. We shouldn't exist. We exist anyway. Our registry is gone. Our intent is to pass. To pass where? Home. The Empire did not like answers that fitted on a single beat. It preferred clauses, proofs, oaths that took breath to recite. The watch captain looked at Sira as if she were a judge. She shrugged. The hub smelled suddenly of dust and charged metal, the two constants of a room that would soon host an argument. Open a narrow corridor and shadow them, he told his people. Keep the fields high. If they deviate, we engage. On the underside of the ring, gunspires unfolded like flowers with bad intentions. Sira felt the vibration through the deck. Something in her chest tightened. An old reflex from the first time she'd watched a weapons array extend toward a ship bearing news. In wars, news traveled before its carriers could name it. The formation changed. Not a break, not an attack posture. It rearranged itself with the obedience of flowing water around a rock, opening a void in the center. Through that void slid older shapes, familiar by silhouette and ache, spear-like cruisers with gnarled spinal weapons, fat-bellied carriers wearing patched armor like a veteran's coat, wedge-shaped destroyers with the snub-nosed aggression of alley dogs. Their hulls bore the scars of long days, strange vitrified streaks that looked like melted time, blooms of ceramic grown into perfect hexagons, places where space itself seemed to have been stapled back together and painted a shade too dark. The old voice was joined by others then, chorus layered over shifting encryption, a woman with the rough, musical cadence of a shipborne medic humored by the universe. A young man reading coordinates in an accent not used in 200 years, except by nostalgic actors. A machine voice, clipped and kind, requesting docking tonnage for a dreadnought class that the Empire's Navy had quietly erased from its training schemes. Sira felt something like cold starlight slide down her spine. She knew these names, not as registries, but as myths. The Prodigal Dawn, the Harkened Spear, the 75, no 76 survivors of the collapse evacuation. Stories told in dockside bars and children's books with brave colors. The Empire's official history called them lost. The Empire called many things lost when they were inconvenient. They're broadcasting a friend Dorfo key, a tech said, astonished. It pings as human, pure human, not imperial layers. Impossible, the watch captain said again, as if repetition could outvote the present. The rim-wide channel erupted as fleet assets within 3 jumps chimed in, hungry. Admirals asked for confirmation, then for justification, and in the space of a breath began to plan. The Empire might grant asylum to ghosts, but only if the paperwork could be used later to box in the living. Sira wrote a maintenance script. To keep the local comes from burning out, and sent it without being asked. She watched the path toward Orion Gate clear as patrol craft fell back under new orders. There's a carrier in there, she said softly. 3rd row, slightly offset. Look. At the launch doors, they're wrong. No one answered her. Their attention was on the dreadnought taking point, a mammoth black keel with a bow like a blade pulled from a myth. Its shadow crawled over the ring like night. It did not feel like an attack. It felt like an edit, as if the universe had been revised to include a clause everyone had missed, the old voice, which had been calm and clinical, turned lighter by a halftone. "Milo's ring, you have a Sarah Halvern on your maintenance roster." "Yes." She blinked. The watch captain looked at her as if she had grown a second shadow. She realized her shoulders were too square, her breath too shallow. Yes," she said into the open channel. "This is Halvern." "Tell me," the voice said, and the hub's lights flickered with the hiss of ghost-laughing radios. "Do you still put vinegar in the coolant lines to trick the sensors into thinking you flushed the system?" That was from long ago, from a hack she'd used as an apprentice to get an old reactor to pass a test it didn't deserve to pass. She had told exactly one person on a mining tug between jobs, after a day's work that ended with bruises and cheap beer. She had told him because he had been precise and kind and ready to steal, because the universe at the time seemed unable to decide if it was cruel or clever. He had said, with a grin like a shot of gravity, that clever was the thing you chose. "Jace," she whispered, and hated that her voice slipped into a child's register. Jace Kellen had disappeared with a ship and 500 others during the evacuation. The Empire had folded them into the ledger of necessary losses. Jace Kellen, chief engineer on the Prodigal Dawn. The old voice confirmed, and then he laughed like metal ringing true. "That title feels like it belongs to my father. Syrah, we're coming home with a fleet that has no place on your charts." The ring did not sleep that cycle. Its artificial sun dimmed on schedule. Its corridors cycled into night mode, but no one obeyed the rhythms. The hub kept its lights bright, officers moving in uneasy patterns, while technicians whispered in alcoves and pretended to recalibrate consoles already clean. Rumor spread faster than any secure channel carried in glances. In the silence of people who suddenly had nothing to say when they usually had too much, Syrah walked the maintenance decks alone, boots echoing in a place where echoes were rare. She had rewired the coolant lines twice since the fleet had passed, hands moving without need of thought, only to tear the work back out because it was too neat to rehearsed. She told herself she was calming the systems, but in truth she was calming herself. Each time she stopped moving, she saw that impossible carrier again, doors folded into fractals like an invitation only she understood. The Empire had ordered silence. Silence, however, was never airtight. By the second rotation, contraband signals began bleeding through. A merchant convoy on the Perseus Drift swore they'd seen strange silhouettes flash across their long-range scans. A mining rig, too, jumps out from Orion, claimed an old friend's voice had spoken through their broken radio. A voice, the crew swore, had been dead for centuries. And scattered across the rim, children were heard chanting a rhyme that no adult remembered teaching them: "Fleet comes back, Empire cracks." The Admiralty panicked. Dozens of memos bled into the command net, each more frantic than the last. All garrisons within 10 jumps were told to drill for contact with unauthorized vessels. Analysts produced dossiers of possible imposters, pirates masquerading. With ancient hulls, heretics armed with scavenged tech. None of it convinced anyone the Empire had enemies, yes, but none could have forced the Orion Gate to kneel. None could have left the admirals afraid to put their names on their own words. Syrah's supervisor found her on the lower decks, hunched over a panel she had disassembled into a graveyard of screws. He was an older man, more bone than muscle. Skin marked by a lifetime under recycled air, he leaned against the bulkhead and said nothing at first, letting the silence weigh. "You were on the hub?" he said finally. She tightened a bolt without looking at him. "So was half the ring. But it was your name they asked for. Your mark that sent them through." His tone carried no accusation, but something heavier responsibility. The memory of Jace's voice was still too fresh, too dangerous. "I didn't send them anywhere. They already knew the path. I just reminded them of it." "That's what frightens the Empire most," her supervisor murmured. "That they don't own the paths. That someone else remembers." She wanted to argue, but the words clotted in her throat. Instead, she packed her tools, stood, and left, the screws scattered like bones. When the summons came, it was not a surprise. A courier drone descended into the maintenance bay, unfolded its wings of light, and projected a simple command: report to Sector Tribunal, Level 3. The tribunal chamber was colder than any maintenance deck. Its walls were smooth, no seams, no bolts, as if the room itself had been grown rather than built. 3 judges sat in elevated chairs, their faces obscured by thin veils of shifting holofacial anonymity, meant to erase identity into authority. Sarah stood in the center, a single chair behind her, which she did not take. You were identified by a returning fleet of unknown registry, the left judge said, voice mechanical through distortion. Yes, Sarah answered, her voice steady, though her chest tightened. What was your connection to them? She hesitated. She thought of Jace's laugh, of a carrier with fractal doors, of an empire that demanded silence and obedience in equal measure. I knew one of their engineers. A long time ago, the middle judge leaned forward, named Jace Kellen, chief engineer of the Prodigal Dawn. Lost during the collapse evacuation, the chamber hummed faintly as data shifted through unseen circuits. The right judge spoke now sharper. That name has not been in service records for 173 years. Then the records are wrong, Sarah said simply. A pause, a ripple of static across the veils. You claim continuity across centuries. I claim nothing, she said, though inside she felt the dangerous heat of conviction. I only repeat what I heard. He called me by name. He remembered details no one else would know. The judges conferred silently, words hidden in encrypted subchannels. When they spoke again, the tone had shifted. You will be transferred to Orion Gate Command. The Admiralty wishes to debrief you directly. Until then, you are confined to quarters. Sarah inclined her head. The words confinement and imprisonment were not the same, but both meant chains. Escorted back to her quarters, she sat on the narrow bunk and stared at the wall until the hum of systems lulled her into half-sleep. And in that half-dreaming state, the wall rippled. Not visibly, not in the eyes, but in the deep sense of things, a shimmer of something other. She blinked, and a voice, faint but certain, brushed her ear. Not safe, Jace whispered, carried on no channel the Empire owned. They'll use you to bait us. She sat bolt upright, pulse racing. Where are you? She breathed, though she knew no one could hear her aloud. Close enough, came the answer, fading. To know we're not done yet. The shimmer vanished. The wall was only a wall again. But Sarah's heartbeat did not slow. She understood now that the fleet had not vanished into legend again. They were near, too near, and watching. And the Empire, for all its orders and tribunals, had no idea how to fight something that shouldn't exist. The transfer order arrived within a single cycle, a sheet of light on her wall that dissolved after she read it. 2 guards came, not brutal but not gentle, escorting her through Milo's rings, crowded arteries to the shuttle bay. Not to watch, she caught the sidelong glances all the same. The way workers paused mid-task and pilots lingered at consoles just a fraction longer, as if their silence could cloak the fact they were measuring her like a symbol. The shuttle was an older Imperial model, all sharp edges and unnecessary bulk. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cold metal and antiseptic, like no one had ever lived here. The guards said nothing during launch, and Sarah did not bother to ask questions they wouldn't answer. Milo's ring shrank behind them, a band of steel glowing faintly against the endless dark. Ahead, the Orion Gate grew enormous, but never like this. It felt different now, as though her eyes had learned to notice its secrets. The inner surfaces seemed to ripple faintly, aurora sleeping beneath steel. Fortress fused directly into the gate's outer spine. The corridors here were wide and gleaming. Soldiers in formal armor lined the walkways, their eyes hidden behind mirrored visors. Sarah was led through security fields that prickled her skin. She had known. The Admiralty gathered around a table shaped like a star cut into metal. Holograms shimmered above its surface, outlines of the returning fleet. Frozen at the moment before they had plunged into the gate, every admiral bore the look of someone who wanted to believe nothing had changed, but knew everything had. You are Sarah Halvern, one of them said, his voice clipped, each syllable honed to a weapon. You identified with the fleet. They recognized you. I told you already. I knew one of them a long time ago. The evacuation was centuries ago. Those ships cannot be the same. What are they? Sira hesitated. The truth hung heavy in her throat. If she said too little, she risked vanishing into one of the Empire's silences. Those disappearances no one dared speak of. If she said too much, she might do more than herself. They are human, she said finally. Human in a way that the Empire forgot how to be. The room chilled further. Some admirals scowled, others shifted uncomfortably. One woman, her hair silver but her eyes alive, studied Sarah as though she were a puzzle worth solving. "They bent the gate," the woman murmured, almost to herself. "No one outside the Empire has ever bent the gate." "They didn't bend. It," Sarah corrected softly. "They asked, and it answered." The silver-haired admiral's lips curved, not quite a smile. Orders were given. Sarah was to remain at Orion Command under observation. Her every movement tracked, her every word recorded. The Admiralty would convene again in 3 cycles. Once their analysts had torn apart every frame of data, she was escorted to a narrow room high in the fortress. No locks were visible, but she knew there were plenty. She lay on the bunk, sleepless, listening to the hum of machinery thrumming through the walls. And then it came again, the shimmer. A whisper brushed against her ear, warm, despite the cold. "They're already afraid," Jace's voice said. Her throat tightened. "Where are you?" she whispered. "Not where they expect. But we can reach you." Sira closed her eyes, clutching the blanket as though it were an anchor. "They'll use me. They'll try to bait you. We know. That's why you mustn't let them break you. At her, you saw the carrier. You know what we've learned." Images returned to her unbidden. Those fractal doors. It hadn't been just engineering it, had been a statement. A rejection of the Empire's monopoly on what could and couldn't exist. "What are you planning, Jace?" she asked. There was a pause, long enough that she feared he'd gone. "Then, we're going to prove the Empire is smaller than it thinks." The shimmer faded. The room was ordinary again, humming with machines and silence. But Sira could still feel the weight of his words. The next cycle, Orion Command buzzed with tension. Fleet movements rippled across the holotables, patrols doubling. Defenses layered thick. The Empire was bracing for an attack, though none had come. Whispers followed Sarah wherever she went, under guard soldiers muttering about the ghost fleet. Analysts speculating on her connection. Again, only this time she stood inside its hangar, surrounded by walls of shifting fractals that hummed like a choir. Ships moved in and out of existence around her, not bound to gravity or inertia, but to something deeper, more patient. And at the center of it all was a single word, that the dream hadn't been just her own. It had been shared, seeded into her by something far beyond the Empire's reach. Outside her viewport, the first strike did not come with guns. It came with silence. On the 3rd cycle after her arrival, every console in Orion Command flickered. Not a power loss, not the jagged stutter of sabotage, but a smooth transition, as if the machines had chosen to dream. The holotables dimmed, defense grids stalled mid-pulse, and comm channels filled with static that was almost musical. Officers shouted, techs scrambled, but every diagnostic returned the same absurd verdict. Systems were operational. They had simply stopped obeying. Through the silence, a single broadcast cut across all frequencies. No encryption, no signature, just a line of text scrolling across every screen. "White against black, we remember." The words repeated once, then vanished, leaving systems to hum back to life as if nothing had happened. Panic spread like fire in oxygen. Admirals barked orders for lockdowns, data analysts demanded forensic sweeps, and soldiers stalked the halls with rifles ready for enemies that were nowhere in sight. Sira watched from her observation cell, her viewport angled toward the gate. She hadn't moved when the blackout came. Somehow she had known it wasn't aimed at her, but through her. The message felt personal, like a hand brushing her shoulder. Later that cycle, she was dragged back into the Admiralty chamber. The silver-haired admiral was there again, calm amidst the storm. The others looked frayed, their composure stripped. "Then they're inside our systems," one spat, slamming a fist on the star-shaped table. "A fleet that shouldn't exist is seeding propaganda across the Empire's strongest bastion." It wasn't propaganda, Sira said. Before she could stop herself, it was memory. Every head turned to her. She felt the weight of their eyes like knives, but she stood straighter. You've spent centuries erasing the past. They haven't. The silver-haired admiral's lips curved faintly again, explained. Sarah swallowed. The fleet, you saw, they carry more than hulls and weapons. They carry the record of what humanity was before you buried it under banners and chains. They aren't broadcasting for control. They're reminding us we exist outside your empire. The room erupted in fury, voices layered in overlapping demands. The word treason rang out more than once. She expected a guard's rifle to press against her back, but instead the silver-haired admiral lifted a hand. Silence fell like a gavel. Cannot kill her, the admiral said coolly. Not yet. If the fleet values her voice, then she is leverage. She will remain here under my watch. Leverage, the word crawled over her skin. She understood now why Jace had warned her. She was not a person in their eyes, she was bait. That night, the shimmer returned. Stronger this time, enough to make the lights in her quarters flicker. Jace's voice carried urgency. They've locked you in the center of their fortress. They think we'll come crashing through to fetch you. They want a war on their terms. Syrah gripped the edge of the bunk, her pulse racing. And will you a pause? Then quiet, but firm. No, we won't be lured, but we'll still act. Then, what do you need from me? Another pause. Longer. She could almost see his face in the silence. The way he used to hesitate before proposing some wild, reckless repair scheme. When the time comes, Jace said, you'll know. The gate listens. To you, more than you realize. Trust it. The shimmer faded, leaving her in darkness. She lay awake until dawn cycle, staring at the glow of the Orion gate outside her viewport, wondering how a mechanic with vinegar tricks could possibly matter to structures that bent time and space. 2 cycles later, the fleet returned, not all of it, just to spearhead a wedge of cruisers and destroyers sliding out of the dark like knives pulled from a sheath. No warning, no chatter. They did not fire. They simply took up position beyond the gate, silent and waiting. The Admiralty panicked. Anew, defense grids roared online, ships scrambled from hangars, and Orion Command's halls filled with the electric tension of men preparing for a war they did not understand. From her viewport, Syrah saw them, black holes glinting faintly, scars glowing like old wounds, and at their heart, a shape she recognized, the impossible carrier. Fractal doors folded closed like a secret. The Empire's strongest fortress faced the fleet that shouldn't exist. Neither moved. The universe itself seemed to hold its breath. And Sarah, heart pounding, knew the first real battle was no longer about weapons. It was about who could command belief. Asterisk, the standoff lasted 3 days. 3 days of ships arrayed. In silence, Empire and fleet glaring at one another across the black gulf of space, their weapons hot but not yet fired. 3 days in which every citizen on Orion Command lived in a state of suspended breath, going through the motions of duty. While waiting for the first spark to ignite an inferno, for Syrah, the silence was the loudest sound she had ever known. Each night she returned to her narrow quarters. Each day she was summoned for interrogation, thinly disguised as debriefing. The Admiralty wanted her to name weaknesses, to offer some secret key to unravel the fleet's return. She told them nothing more than she had already said, that she knew one man, Jace Kellen, and that the fleet had remembered what the Empire had chosen to forget. Her restraint only sharpened their suspicion. Guards never left her alone, even outside her cell. And yet, in quiet moments, the shimmer still came. On the 4th night of the standoff, it was different, stronger. The lights in her chamber dimmed, not from power rationing, but as if deliberately pushed back. When the shimmer formed, it wasn't just a whisper. A figure stood in the center of the room, faint as smoke, yet unmistakably real. Jace, he looked older-lined, scarred, hair shot through with white, but his grin was the same. It hit her like a shock. "Hello, Syrah," her throat closed, but she forced the word out. "How?" Projection through the carrier. Risky, but worth it. His gaze swept the room. "We don't have long. The Empire's trying to jam us already." She stepped closer, almost afraid the image would vanish. Why now? Because the Empire is preparing to strike first. They've rigged the gate with fail-safes, hidden subroutines, that can lock it in a permanent collapse state. If they trigger it while we're inside, his expression hardened. "The fleet dies here, forever." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. "Then don't go through. We have to. What we carry, what we've learned, can't stay in the dark. If the Empire seals this throat of the galaxy, every other gate will follow. They'll erase us from the map, Sura, and they'll erase the memory that humans can live free. Her pulse hammered. What can I do? I'm trapped here. Jace's eyes softened just for a breath. The gate listens to you. You proved it. When you gave us the mark, we seeded something inside those fractal doors, something tied to human intent. If they trigger the collapse, you can override it. You're the only one who can. Her knees nearly buckled. I'm just a mechanic. You're human. His voice was steady, fierce. That's what matters. That's what they forgot. The shimmer faltered. Static crawled over his image, tearing it into fragments. He held her gaze until the last moment. Remember, Sarah, when the gate screams, answer it. Then he was gone. Moments later, alarms blared through Orion Command. Red lights bade the halls. Over the intercom, voices barked orders. All personnel to battle stations. Fleet is advancing. Defense grids hot. Initiate gate lock protocols. Sira's guards seized her arms, dragging her from the room. She stumbled but kept moving, heart pounding. With Jace's last words, the gate was about to scream. And she, just a mechanic with grease-stained hands, was supposed to answer. They hauled her back to the Admiralty chamber. The holotable glowed with motion, the fleet shifting formation, the impossible carrier drifting forward like a herald. The admirals were a storm of voices, debating tactics, demanding fire, arguing over who would bear responsibility if the first shot led to disaster. One phrase cut through the chaos, triggered the lock. The halotable shifted again, displaying deep schematics of the Orion Gate. Hidden routines flickered to life. Fail-safes buried so deep no civilian would ever know they existed. Sira stared, cold horror flooding her veins. Jace hadn't been lying. As the lock sequence initiated, the gate itself began to change. Its auroras flared wildly, colors lashing like lightning. Its great spine vibrating with a sound that wasn't sound at all, but something deeper, something alive. Every console in the chamber shook. The gate was screaming. Sira's voice tore from her throat. Before she knew she'd spoken, "Stop it, you'll collapse it." The admirals ignored her. Soldiers tightened their grips on rifles. The lock code advanced dot. And then the shimmer came not in her quarters, not faint, but here, in the heart of the chamber. For an instant, the halotable was overwritten with fractal light, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The gate wasn't calling to the admirals. It was calling to her. She felt the code in her bones, not as numbers, but as intent. She could speak. Back not with commands, not with rank, but with the raw insistence of being human, of refusing to vanish. Her lips parted. The words that came were not hers, not entirely, but something older, something carried by the fleet through centuries. Of exile, we exist. We return, open. The chamber shook violently. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. Soldiers cried out. The admirals shouted in terror. And on the halotable, the gate flared open wider than ever before, its auroras roaring like an ocean. Unleashed, the fleet surged forward. The Empire had tried to lock the gate. Instead, Sira had flung it wide. The first shot came not from the fleet, but from the Empire. A volley of plasma lances erupted from Orion Command's defense grid, streaking like furious comets into the void. They slammed against the dreadnought's prow in a flare of white fire and dissipated. The dreadnought emerged untouched, its hull shimmering with a strange distortion, as though the weapons had been swallowed into a future where they had never been fired. Panic seized the Admiralty chamber. Orders flew, ships scrambled, the Empire's fortress pouring its fury into the dark. Yet nothing struck true. Every missile twisted away, every lance guttered into harmless light. The fleet advanced in silence, as if pitying the futility of the Empire's rage. Sira stood in the center of the storm, her heart a drum. She had not meant to open the gate so fully, but now she saw the consequence. The fleet had come through, whole and terrible. The fractal carrier emerged at the center of the formation, its doors unfolding like petals of a flower that should never have existed for the first time. The Empire saw what the fleet carried, not ships, not weapons. People. The hangar glowed, with thousands of suspended cradles, each one holding a human form. Some were old, some young, some altered in ways the Empire had long forbidden, segments that shimmered like starlight under their skin. Symbiotic graphs pulsing with color, minds linked in luminous webs of thought. They were alive, awake, and watching. The fleet was not just a fleet, it was an ark. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Even the admirals fell silent, their orders dying on their tongues. This was no invasion, it was a return. A voice boomed across every frequency, layered and resonant, not Jace's, but something greater. A chorus of thousands speaking as one. We are humanity, not the Empire's property, not its soldiers, not its records. We are what you forgot, and we are here. The words rippled outward, carried not just by radio, but by the very fabric of the gate itself. Across 10 systems, people heard them in dreams, in whispers of static, in the beating of their hearts. On distant worlds, miners laid down tools, farmers paused in their fields, children laughed without knowing why. The Empire's silence had cracked. The admirals screamed for retaliation. Crush them, kill the traitors before the infection spreads, but no weapon answered. Across Orion Command, defense grids faltered, gunships stalled, systems froze. The fleet had not only hacked the Empire's machines, they had rewritten the very language those machines obeyed. Sero felt the pull in her bones again, the same resonance she'd heard when she gave the mark. The gate still listened, and so did the fleet. JACE. Single quotes S voice cut through the chorus, personal and sharp. Sarah, choose, stand with them, or let the Empire bury us again. Her chest tightened. The admirals were watching her now, their eyes fever bright to them. She was already guilty, already the knife in their heart. She turned toward the viewport. The fleet was there, scars glowing, fractal doors wide. Thousands of eyes gazed out from the ark, waiting. Belief burned in them, belief so fierce it felt like gravity. She drew in a breath, steady and sure. I choose. The gate flared brighter than ever before. The fleet surged forward, not with weapons, but with humanity itself, pouring into the Empire's greatest fortress like light flooding a tomb. Soldiers froze, their rifles falling slack. Officers hesitated, their orders catching. In their throats, for the first time in centuries, the Empire's control wavered not under bombardment, but under memory. The battle had begun, but not the kind the admirals had prepared for. This was not conquest, this was awakening, and Sira knew it could not be stopped. The awakening spread faster than any fire, faster than any weapon. At first, it was just Orion Command, the fortress's vast systems failing to obey their masters. Gunships sat in hangars with engines idling, refusing launch commands. Defense grids blinked online and offline, as if confused about their purpose. Soldiers clutched their rifles, but found their hands shaking. Memories of families and oaths long buried flooding back. But then the wave rippled outward. Every channel, every relay, every sliver of the commnet carried the fleet's chorus. Miners on Karthos 3 felt it like a sudden song in their heads. Farmers on Narrow 7 stood in their fields staring at the sky, their tools forgotten. Even prisoners in the black cells of the core heard it in their dreams and woke with tears in their eyes. We are humanity, not the Empire's property, not its silence. Across 10 systems, people remembered what it meant to belong to themselves. And in that remembering, the Empire began to crack. The admirals saw it in real time on their holotable systems, flashing red, not because of attack, but because of desertion. Patrol ships mutinied, crews turning their vessels toward the fleet. Civilian stations broadcast the forbidden word human in capital letters across their hulls. Even some Imperial captains, their eyes bright with something fierce and long denied, broke ranks and hailed the fleet. The chamber dissolved into chaos. Admirals shouted over one another, demanding executions, demanding bombardment, demanding someone do something. Soldiers rushed to drag Sira away, but the gate still pulsed through her veins, and the fleet's presence wrapped around her like a shield. Then the Empire's fury boiled over. A single admiral, eyes wild, slammed her palm on the table and screamed, "Fire everything. Obliterate them before the infection takes root." For a heartbeat, the fortress obeyed. Launch bays cracked open, plasma lances lit, warheads primed. For all its faltering, Orion Command was still a weapon built for extermination. The first salvo streaked into the dark. This time, the fleet did not remain passive. The dreadnought roared alive, not with fire, but with something stranger: space. Bent around its prow, swallowing the incoming barrage, missiles vanished into nothing. Plasma streams curved aside, bent into harmless spirals of light. The dreadnought's scars glowed like molten gold, drinking fury and returning silence. Then, the fleet answered. Cruisers broke formation, their drives spitting brilliance, not to attack, but to interpose themselves between Orion Command's guns and the Ark. Destroyers darted forward like wolves, not to kill, but to disable. Imperial corvettes shuddered and spun, their systems hijacked mid-flight, their crews finding themselves alive in captured ships instead of dead in wreckage. The impossible carrier opened its fractal doors, and from within streamed not fighters, but small vessels glowing with aurora. They weren't built for war, they were built for seeding. Each one streaked toward Imperial ships and stations, carrying pulses of light that struck not hulls, but minds. Wherever they landed, silence broke, and people remembered. Zero felt every heartbeat of it through the gate. The Empire was still fighting, still raging, but the war was slipping from their grasp. The fleet was not conquering them, it was undoing them. An admiral lunged toward her, face twisted with rage. "This is your doing, you've doomed us all." She met his fury with steady eyes. "No, you doomed yourselves when you forgot what you were." Outside the viewport, the battle spread into a storm. Ships collided, not always with weapons, but with choice crews defecting, captains breaking ranks, entire squadrons turning their guns, not on the fleet, but on their own superiors. The Empire was fighting itself as much as the enemy, and through it all, the fleet advanced, relentless, inevitable, a tide of memory and willpower that no empire could cage. Sierra's pulse hammered with one terrible certainty: this was no longer a battle for survival. This was the beginning of the end. The Empire was crumbling, and humanity was waking up. When the Admiralty realized the battle was slipping beyond their grasp, when even their own captains began to defect, they invoked a protocol no one had spoken aloud in centuries. Deep beneath Orion Command, in vaults sealed under layers of law and denial, slept a weapon meant never to be used again. Its designation was sterile continuity collapse. Device, but those who knew the whispers called it what it was. The World-Eater. Sarah felt it before they announced it. The gate shivered, its auroras convulsing as something vast and brutal stirred in the fortress's heart. She staggered, clutching the viewport frame, as though the stars themselves had groaned in pain. On the holotable, the admirals stood with grim faces. "The fleet is infection," one said coldly. "We will cauterize better. The galaxy burns clean than humanity survives in corruption." "No," Sierra whispered, horror rising like bile. "You'll kill everything. Not just them. Everyone tied to the gate. Entire systems will collapse. That is preferable to rebellion." The words were spoken without a flicker of doubt. Her knees trembled. She had suspected the Empire's cruelty, but not this readiness to erase whole worlds, to treat their own people as acceptable. Ashdot, then. Like a hand reaching through darkness, Jace's voice cut into her skull. "They're arming it, aren't they?" She nodded, not caring if the Admiral saw her speaking to ghosts, a collapsed device. "They'll burn the gate itself." For a moment, there was silence on the other end. Then Jace's voice, low and steady. "We feared this. That's why we came not just with ships, but with the seed." The seed, the carrier, isn't just an Ark, Sarah. It carries the foundation of a new network, a way to awaken every gate, every corridor. Chains. If they destroy this one, we'll lose the seed before it takes root. Her chest tightened. "What do you need me to do?" "Stop the lock. Again, but this time, don't just hold it open. Give it a choice." She stared at the fractal glow spilling from the viewport. "The gate is a machine." "No," Jace corrected gently. "The gate is alive. You've felt it? Speak to it. Remind it that it was never built to serve an empire." The chamber around her shook as the continuity device armed. Red lights bathed the walls. Soldiers braced for impact. The admirals stood rigid, eyes cold, resolved to murder galaxies in the name of control. Sarah closed her eyes and reached for the hum in her bones. It was there the gate's heartbeat, vast and deep, waiting. She opened her mouth and let the words come. You were made for us. For all of us. Not for chains, not for silence. You are the road. You are the memory. You are the way home. The air rippled. The holotable sparked. Admirals staggered as the gate's auroras surged, brilliant and violent, drowning every system. In light dot, and then came the answer, not in words, not in sound, but in certainty. Yes, the continuity device's sequence froze, its timers unraveling into nothing. The fortress shuddered as the weapon's energy bled harmlessly away. Systems rebooted across Orion Command, but this time they no longer listened to Imperial authority. They listened to the gate. And the gate had chosen. Across the viewport, the impossible carrier opened wide, its seed vessels streaking into the auroras. The light bent around them and then bent outward, racing down corridors of space-time into distant gates, distant stars. The seed was taking root, the admirals screamed, their authority crumbling, but their words were ash in the storm. The fleet had not just survived, they had awakened the first of many. Sarah stood tall, her body trembling but her voice steady. It's over. You don't command us anymore. For the first time the admirals looked afraid, and beyond Orion Gate, the galaxy began to change. Asterisk, the gate's auroras burned like dawn across the void. The battle stilled. Imperial ships hung in formation, but their weapons no longer fired. Crews had stopped listening to admirals' orders. Some stood frozen. At their stations, others dropped their rifles altogether. The Empire's iron discipline, its centuries of silence, had fractured in a single heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, the fleet did not strike. They could have. Their dreadnoughts loomed unbroken, their destroyers prowled ready, their arc pulsed, with power the Empire could not fathom. Yet no salvo came, no demand for surrender. Instead, the chorus rose again. Not a shout, but a steady, resonant voice carried across every channel. We are here. We will not vanish again. The Empire ends where humanity remembers itself. The words threaded through systems like roots digging. Into fertile ground, reports spilled into Orion Command faster than the admirals could suppress. Colonies raising old banners, outposts refusing orders, whole fleets turning their guns away from the fleet and toward the Admiralty itself. The rebellion was not fire and fury. It was recognition. People were choosing to belong to themselves again. The admiral's fury curdled into fear. One tried to lunge at the controls, another barked orders at guards who no longer moved. The admiral, the one who had watched Sarah with unsettling calm, simply lowered her head. It's begun, she murmured, and nothing we do will stop it. Sarah turned to the viewport. The gate's auroras were still bright, still humming in her bones. She felt their presence like a hand pressed to her chest, steadying her. She thought of Jace, of his grin and his scars, of the voice that had carried her through the Empire's cages. He had told her the fleet was smaller than the Empire thought. He had been wrong. It was larger because it was not just ships, it was everyone who remembered. Her guards no longer held her. She stepped forward into the center of the chamber, her voice carrying not with authority, but with certainty. This is the end of your empire. Not because we destroyed it, because you forgot what it meant to be human. Silence answered her. Not obedient silence, the kind that followed truth, too heavy to deny. Outside, the Ark's fractal doors folded closed. Their work unfinished, but secure. The dreadnought dipped its prow, not in surrender, but in recognition, before turning away. The fleet began to retreat into the gate, one by one, their scars glowing like stars. Jace's voice reached her one last time, soft as breath against her ear. We'll keep seeding, system by system, gate by gate. This is only the beginning. Hold fast, Sarah. Remember for them when they doubt. Her eyes stung, but she smiled. Always, the fleet vanished into the auroras. The gate quieted, its glow dimming back to the patient shimmer of possibility. What remained was silence and a fortress. Of admirals who no longer commanded anything but ghosts, Milo's ring would whisper the story first. Then Perseus Drift, then Karthos Neral, the core itself. In days it would be rumor, in months it would be movement. In years it would be truth again. Humanity had returned. not as an empire, not as silence, as itself. Ciro stood at the view long after the chamber emptied, long after her name would begin to spread as the woman who spoke for the gate. She did not feel like a hero. She felt like a mechanic with grease under her nails and a lunch pack still in her pocket. But perhaps that was enough. The fleet that shouldn't exist had crushed the empire, and in their wake, humanity was awake.